Hello, quick disclaimer before we start this podcast episode. We are not medical professionals and we are just talking about our personal experiences and research. This is not any type of place to get a diagnosis, but if you do learn from the information, go seek a medical professional for any other information. Hope you enjoyed the podcast episode. Hello, welcome on Word on the Street. This is Shelly, your host, and I have a guest with me today.
Hi, my name is Hailey. I am a junior here at Santa Clara University. My major is business management, and I work at the post office here on campus.
All right, great. I really just kind of want to get into this. So today we are going to be talking about neurodivergency and ADHD. So, how would you define ADHD and what are these kind of elements that are encapsulated by this?
Yeah, so according to the National Institute of Mental Health, ADHD is marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention or hyperactivity impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. And there's 3 different types of ADHD. It has been referred to as ADD in the past for the more inattentive type, but now it's just one umbrella term, ADHD, and inattentive is getting distracted, having poor concentration and organizational skills, and hyperactivity is when someone never seems to slow down, talking and fidgeting, difficulty staying on task. And then combined is when, because of course people have a little bit of both, but combined is when it's pretty equal of both.
Yeah, I feel like generally people who kind of talk about ADHD don't talk about the specific type of ADHD. They just put it as umbrella term. So both of us have quote ADHD, but we were diagnosed with ADD, inattentive disorder.
Yeah.
Particularly. So it's very interesting that the terms are kind of used interchangeably, and that's kind of something to keep in mind as we talk about this as well. It's just kind of used as an umbrella term. So
yeah, I think that's why so many people or so many women don't get diagnosed, because the inattentive, when you think of ADHD, you think about that hyperactivity, or at least I do. And so when you don't know about the inattentiveness, it's these women who are more likely to have inattentive type of ADHD are being really underdiagnosed.
Yeah, because I think generally, it manifests very differently, and I think we've kind of talked about this before, that women are kind of high masking and not showing ADHD symptoms in a way, being moving in class, interrupting, being disruptive, always having a side conversation, those type of things have been kind of masked, or women have learned to mask, because it's this kind of also gender socialization that's also been pressed onto women as well. Also to keep in mind that when we use women, we're kind of referring to this binary as well, female, because a lot of the research is kind of set in that way. So just to keep in mind, we know the differences for sure of sex and woman, gender, but we're using the binary within this term as well. But yeah, I think it's just interesting in general, because the getting diagnosed is you have to seek it yourself. It's not anybody kind of told you. I don't know, personally, I don't see people, at least women, getting told to go get a diagnosis. It's kind of they seek themselves,
because a
right?
lot of women don't even know they have ADHD until someone points it out to them. I didn't realize until I've been diagnosed with anxiety and stuff when I was younger, and I was seeing a psychiatrist, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, because it can't be depression anymore, because I'm still just not motivated to do stuff. And it's not because I'm sad, it's just because I feel lazy. And she was like, let me have you fill out this questionnaire. And, I was answering it, and she was like, yeah, so it looks like you have inattentive ADHD. And then, I did a little bit more research and talked to my parents and talked with her some more. And I realized how much I have been struggling And I thought that I was just lazy. And it's like, no, babe, you actually have like a mental disorder.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like it manifested differently and like in my mindset. Like I didn't think of it as laziness. I thought it as stupidity because I couldn't pay attention. So a lot of the time, like I already struggled a lot in education growing up, especially like, you know, a lot of teachers like, oh, you have dyslexia, like you just have like a learning disability and all these things. So like I internalized, especially with all the stigmatization with ADHD, learning disability, dyslexia, all of these things are like kind of categorized into stupidity. Like you're just stupid, you're just not, you know, like that's not like some actual mental difficulty. It's just like, you're just like stupid in a way. But like that's how I internalized it, which is, you know, not fair to, you know, assume. But like I guess through seeing through like my like just kind of living with it and existing with it, I just literally thought I was just like just stupid because I was like I couldn't understand anything. I couldn't listen to it because I would be so like I'd be in class, I'd be like trying to like lock in so hard. I'd be like hearing everything they say and then just didn't like fully process through my brain
100%.
and just out my ears, and I'm like, why can't I understand this? Especially verbal instructions.
Yes.
I cannot do verbal instructions at all. Like I really need to see a physical instructions. And I think also like people don't really notice that like ADHD is just not like you just can't pay attention.
Yeah.
It's just also like cognitive processing as well.
Yes.
But I don't know, like.
And I think that's why women with ADHD, it's so common for them to also have anxiety, depression, like low self-esteem and stuff like that, because it's so internalized and often gone unnoticed for a really long time, to the point where you're like, well, if this is how everyone lives their life, I must be stupid. I must be lazy. It must be me. And it's that's really sad to think about, too, that, you know, men are 3 times as more likely to get this diagnosis, and women are just kind of like left in the dark, not knowing about these symptoms. It's not talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly actually hadn't known anybody who was diagnosed with like ADHD, like at least like a woman who's been diagnosed, because like I don't know, it's just like a conversation that's not very apparent either. I just think women also have this sense of like not only the anxieties developing from like not fitting in or the so like not getting things right away, but also like just the aspect of, I think people who are also like neurodivergent are more likely to have anxiety and all these type of symptoms as well, like depression as well, not just from the fact of like not be able to fit in socially, but they're more prone to having these type of mental challenges as well.
Yeah, I think that's because a big symptom of ADHD is emotional dysregulation, which is basically when the prefrontal cortex may be underactive due to, you know, low dopamine levels. And the prefrontal cortex basically regulates emotions, makes decisions, and controls impulses. So this underactivity can lead to difficulties in regulating emotions because the prefrontal cortex can't effectively regulate the emotional responses of the amygdala, which results in emotional dysregulation.
Yeah, I think the emotional dysregulation and like impulsivity is the most known out of it. Like I personally experience compulsive impulsivity mostly out of spending, like a lot of shopping type of addiction to get like that dopamine effect. Yeah. And I didn't realize that was a symptom because, you know, I was just like, oh, I just like a lot of things. I'm just a material girl. Like, I was like, it's that thing. But then I was like, oh, wow, like, this is actually becoming an issue. And that's, like, one of the things that people that with, like, ADHD, they're like, oh, they just can't focus. That really doesn't bring any harm to them. But the actual harm is the fact that a lot of people who are, like, maybe not been diagnosed with ADHD can have a lot of financial instability issues. They can have a lot of issues of forgetting important appointments, government documents, paying their credit card bills. These are things that actually impede someone's life. And people don't really just think, oh, you just, like, are forgetful or whatever. But, like, these things are very important and can very be disruptive. I don't know. I just feel like people 100%. Don't think it as a big thing. Like,
no, totally. For me, I don't deal with that type of impulsivity. I'm sure I deal with some form of it that I don't even know about. But for me, the emotional dysregulation really looks like strong emotions. And I was, researching it a little bit, like symptoms of ADHD in young girls, like with inattentive ADHD. And it's that like super talkative behavior and not being able to manage or having like really strong emotions. And I think that's because you feel so many emotions and your prefrontal cortex there's no rationality there. She's turned off. So you're just feeling all these emotions and you don't know why. And yeah,
it connects with overstimulation too. Like, I didn't
100%.
realize like certain things or behaviors I would do was because of overstimulation. Like, I would have like scratching behaviors when I was younger as a kid. Like when there's a lot of like, let's say I was being like yelled at or disciplined or like some aspect of thing that I wasn't like really fully understanding. Like the only way to relieve my anxiety was like scratching. Like, it was just like to stimulate, to kind of bring myself back. And I didn't realize like these stimulating behaviors. And it's interesting because I feel like stimulation and like ADHD is a very like common connection. Like, fidget things or like things with like shaking your leg.
Yeah.
Even though like a lot of people do those type of things, doesn't necessarily mean you have ADHD, but it's a type of stimulation. Like, some people, like most people have a form of stimulation.
Yeah.
Like a form of thing, but it's like people who have ADHD is kind of this excessive amount.
The difference between stimming and fidgeting is that stimming is more severe, it occurs more, and it can actually it can interfere with how you function or how it affects your body because there's no control. It's that lack of control. But because with fidgeting, you can put the fidget down. Or you can, it might kind of be unconscious, but if someone, like if you were shaking your leg and someone was like, oh, like, can you stop like bouncing your leg? You probably could do that. Stimming is like, no, like you don't even realize that you're doing it.
Yeah.
And a really interesting type of stimming that you and I figured out was a thing is this thing called echolalia. And it's basically repeating someone's words back to them, and you don't even realize you're doing it. And I saw it on TikTok, but I looked it up and it's a real thing, and it's basically, it's just when you repeat each other's phrases. And so I didn't know that I had a vocal stim where I would just go or like make a little like weird sound, and I didn't know I would do that. And then Shelly started going, "Meh," and I was like, oh, that's funny that you do that. And somehow, we were talking about my friends and it came up and they were like, oh yeah, that's Hailey's thing. And I was like, no, that's Shelly's thing. And they were like, no, girl, she was copying you. And I was like, oh. So it's my vocal stim combined with your echolalia. And now it's gotten to a point where your housemates are doing a little like,
it like spreads.
Yeah.
But it's also because it's a combination of like impulsivity. It's like apparently it was like I was reading about it, and it's like because this urge or need to mimic, and it's a combination. It's impulsivity and then wanting to like. It's kind of similar to the idea where, have you ever like heard someone with an accent and they're speaking to you, but then you're like,
you want to mimic the
instinctual accent. It's because a part of us wants to make our like communication clear.
Yes.
So I think these are kind of culminations of why these type of.
That makes sense. So there's my impulsive thing.
Yeah. Stimming makes sense. But I don't know. I think there's also interesting things that we can also get into within impulsivity and some harms that not only from like spending or buying, but then kind of going into the direction of substance abuse is a big one. Not only ADHD people or, just people in general with like ADHD or have more of a likelihood to have some type of sort of substance addiction is because it's a stimulant. Like cocaine is a really big one for people who have undiagnosed ADHD. Cocaine is something that a lot of people would abuse.
Yeah. Also, do not quote me on this, but people with ADHD tend to like lack some type of dopamine. I'm like 99% sure. And so having a substance, it gives you that dopamine that you're not getting. And it obviously when you're getting dopamine, you're going to want to keep getting the dopamine. But I think something about that the less dopamine with people with ADHD, just makes you even more susceptible.
I think it's a combination of dopamine and a stimulation.
Yes,
right? Like it's.
for
I don't know
sure.
if dopamine is like a form of stimulation or whatever. I don't know how that works because I'm not any.
We are not biology majors.
No, but I was talking to my psychiatrist, and we were talking about highly likelihood of substance abuse within like nicotine. Weed use is a really big one, and because of this dependency, people start developing on it because it's also like you're saying, it's a stimulation.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're not getting like necessarily like medicated in that way, you're gonna try to find forms of stimulation like coffee addiction. Like that a big one.
Right.
Caffeine is a huge one for people who have ADHD. Caffeine, it will make them focus, right? So don't like drink a lot of caffeine. Probably not to the point, the healthy amount of caffeine a day. Like, you know.
Yeah. This might be a bit of a stretch, but it could also be like a coping mechanism because it's also pretty common for people with ADHD to have a history of abuse or like a little bit of PTSD. Mm-hmm. And so stimulants or drugs could be a form of kind of like coping with that abuse. And
No, that makes sense because I also was doing a little bit of research, and people who have ADHD are actually more likely to be in certain abusive relationships or be used in a certain way because of just like that. It's a combination of impulsivity, but then also of like the combination of like.
I have a little snippet from Very Well Minded that I can.
Oh, please share.
Okay. I will. So, emotional dysregulation, inattentiveness, impulsivity, forgetfulness, and disorganization can hinder effective communication and emotional regulation in relationships. This often leads to a partner adopting a parental role, causing perceptions of neglect and personal failure. This intense nature of ADHD can attract individuals to dominant partners and relationships that start with very high intensity, which can mask abusive tendencies such as gaslighting and love bombing.
That's interesting.
So I think, not to call myself out, but I've definitely noticed that in my past relationships where me and my partner have had ADHD, and it's just like, boom, you are going into it. And there's just like, it's really intense and it's fun. But I think if you don't get that like intensity in a relationship, you're kind of bored.
To keep in mind that a stimulation is fighting.
Oh,
yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, stimulation's fighting. So that's why like people who have ADHD can tend to like bait a fight because they might need stimulation. So that fighting brings stimulation, so that can also impact relationships. But also keep in mind that like people who have ADHD can also have very much healthy relationships and communication. It's just keeping, understanding your diagnosis and understanding your journey through your mental, neurodivergency. It's just, I feel like you can navigate a lot easier. Like there was this popular TikTok like person, and he has autism and ADHD, and he was talking about how his mom got diagnosed in his 40s and how he was diagnosed when he was a kid, and that his mom actually having ADHD made him very comfortable to not, like, he's not masking at all. Like, he feels very comfortable in STEM, like, in front of people. Like, he feels very comfortable being being neurodivergent without, like, having this high mask ability. So that actually takes away a lot of his anxiety. But for his mom, who got diagnosed in, like, her 40s, has a high amount of anxiety, huge amount of social anxiety, and feels very uncomfortable to STEM in public or won't ever do it, and because of that high masking element. So that social conditioning as well as can also infect the impact of that anxiety, like we're talking about. Yes, people who have ADHD are more likely to have, certain like anxieties and stuff like that, but also the social element also can bring anxiety. Like there's just two different ways.
Yeah. Now that makes me think, like, how many people have heard my verbal tic and I didn't even realize I was doing it. Like, I'm just casually, working and I'm like, la, 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 like, that, I'm sure I've done that so many times and I don't even realize it.
No, yeah, I feel like it's hard to notice, like, tics in general because, like, I had a big one of, like, picking my, like ripping off the skin off, like, my fingers and stuff, and, like, I would be very unconscious of it, and people would be like, stop, girl, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, sorry, like, I just didn't even notice, you know what I mean? Like, that can be happening a lot.
Yeah.
Fun stuff. But yeah, I don't know, I think in general, the stigmatization is the biggest part of, like, these extra pressures and individuals who have, like, neurodivergency to feel very, I don't know, just to not have a really good positive outlook on themselves. But also it's contributed to the fact that people who have ADHD are also more likely to be really self-critical. So this culmination of society being critical and this combination of us being critical for ourselves will never have this kind of, like, self-love or satisfaction within who we are. And I think it's, like, for me, like, learning about it and, like, seeing and, I don't know, just learning more about ADHD, it makes me both feel better and understanding certain things, but also, like, feeling very nervous in that societal element and, like, telling people about it. I don't know. I just, like, I think in general, like, ADHD is not necessarily, like, there's a lot of good things that come out of it. Like, people who have ADHD are more likely to have a high level of creativity. People with ADHD are more likely to have, you know, impulsivity, but that impulsivity can make them more likely to do things that they would have been uncomfortable with doing. Like, things that they're more able to do different tasks or do different things that could have been out of their comfort zone. They're more likely to be very high, like, social, very, very social, well-socialed in a way. They can interact, understand, empathize with people, understand and read body language super well. But yeah, I think that.
Yeah, I think, so I have ADHD and autism, so I think that's where a little bit different from my experience with people, because with ADHD, like you said, you know, it might be easier for them to understand other people's emotions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of reading social cues, emotions. Because they say, like, people with ADHD can be very in tone with emotion, like vibe shifts, how they portray or, like, talk about, like, how they present themselves emotionally too.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I really think that I see vibe shifts and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what just happened. But I think I'm just around people that are really expressive, because if they're not, I don't notice it. And I also, like, I'm just, or I might read something this way and then I'm with my friend and we're talking about, you know, the experience over again, and they're like, girl, why are you happy about that? They were being so mean to you. And I'm like, what do you mean?
You're like, they're nice.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely that difference, too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, I think having the combination of the two would present the symptoms to be different. And then also that keeps in mind that, like, people are on certain spectrums of certain things. And that brings in a lot of times, like, I know that there's tons of people who have ADHD and or are autistic. I think that's a very common combination for sure, especially with the stimming and, like, all of these type of behaviors are very similar in the branches too. So it's not like it's very much common. Like, I know, like, at least on social media and, like, who present themselves and talk about, you know, wanting to, you know, advocate and educate people on social media and, like, kind of bring a voice onto there, I've noticed a lot of them are like, oh yeah, I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. Like, a very common combination. Or, like, these are the things I've noticed. And I really love how social media has taken a turn into, like, presenting these things and both, like, advocating and educating people, but then also making people feel less stigmatized about their diagnosis.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Like, it's not, like, just the idea of neurodivergency is very, like, there's such a huge spectrum. Like, people don't even realize that. Like, especially, like, the reason I didn't probably also get help way sooner is my mom was super scared of, like getting a diagnosis for me, was because my dad, he was diagnosed with, like, dyslexia. He also probably had, you know, ADHD. He had a lot of, you know, learning disabilities and a lot of these kind of things. And he talked about his experience that he was just majorly put into a class that were fully, like, there's, like, the people who have, like, maybe ADHD and the people who are, like, fully on the spectrum, like, who need, like, very much help.
Yeah.
And can be, like, completely aggressive. Like, there's, like, a lot of, like, you know, emotional, like, I don't know how to, but she was scared because she was like, oh, you're going to be put in those classes, you're going to be, like, subjugated to a whole different place, so she never really wanted to put me ever to get a diagnosis or help. And even though I would be like, I think I need help in this, she'd just, like, kind of brush it off and she'd just let me kind of work through it. She was like, let's just see how she does, because apparently, like, throughout elementary, she was told multiple times by teachers and people, like, she probably should go, you know, get, like, a diagnosis or something, probably. And I think that's why it took so long that until I got older And Hailey actually helped me, like, which is really funny, making a mention about it. And I was like, yeah, you kind of think about it. We have very, like, similarities. And I was like, I kind of want to, like, explore this and look into it. And, I, got tested and got, like, medication and...
Yeah. Well, now that I know what it looks like in people, I feel like I'm just constantly like, yeah, you got ADHD.
You can recognize it.
Yeah. And so, but I forget, like, oh, not everyone has done research, because once I got diagnosed, I hyper-focused on this new thing.
Yes.
And so I feel like I know a fair bit about it just from, like, reading different articles and stuff. And I noticed it in you immediately. And when
I noticed. Immediately.
Yeah, girl, it was kind of obvious. But that's, again, probably not to other people, because I could tell that it was the inattentive type, only because I saw so much similarities between us. And I was like, yep, she got it. And, same with our other friend. I was like, yeah, he probably has ADHD too. And we were talking about it, and the fact that I thought you knew. And you were just like, oh, yeah, this is just kind of how I live my life. And, whatever. But
I had no idea. Girl, I had no idea. And then when I thought about it, I was like, dang, I should look into it. And that's probably the best thing I actually did, was look into it, because I didn't realize how much of an impact it made on my life, and how much, like, it fed into both my anxiety. I just thought I had, like, a lot of anxiety issues, and I thought it was just, like, just had some learning cognition thing, or, like, you know what I mean? Like, I just couldn't process thing. Like, and getting that diagnosis was really both relieving for myself emotionally, and, like, thinking about my past as, like, educationally. And I don't know, it's both, like, hard too, because I'm scared about the fact that, like, getting medication was a big thing, like trying to, like, I don't know, my mom really is, like, an anti-medication, like, she just like, be cautious of it, like, doesn't like things that alter things. So I was, like, really nervous to go into it, but, like, realizing, going through the process, and having a psychiatrist, like, really walk me through it. And like, if you feel like you need that help, and you feel like medication will help, it's not a bad thing to get medication. I feel like there's a big stigmatization of medication. There's a huge wave, like, a couple years ago, about, like, oh, medication is basically just, like, some cocaine, and, there's, like, meth, and it's the same components, and people, like, were trashing on it. But the thing is that, like, this medication is very, very much, like, it is, like...
No, I genuinely don't think that I could be where I'm at today without medication, because in high school, I was just really, like, right before I got diagnosed, my grades were really going downhill. And that's because I was, so used to, like, masking and coping that I could just kind of, like, get through it. But now that I was in these harder classes, and it required me to, like, study, because I never studied for a test before. And so now I'm like, wait, this is really hard. I can't get myself to do anything. And so I was also tired. I thought I had, like, chronic fatigue syndrome or something, because I was always exhausted, because I was my brain was constantly thinking about 40 different things. And I'm so glad that I finally got diagnosed. I still remember the first day I took my medication, I felt it kick in class, and I immediately, it's almost like I had a learning disability. That's kind of what it feels like, where you could hear something and you don't fully understand it, but now I'm able to communicate my thoughts to people in a way that it makes sense. And I really struggled with that before.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Like, I feel like that's what happened to me. Like, my big issue is that, yes, my grades were always decent. Like, I was able to make it through, like, through decent grades throughout high school. Like, I was holding on to dear life, for sure. Yeah. But I was able to make it through. But it was just interesting, because, like, I remember this one class, and it was chemistry. It was, like, this IB chemistry, and it was killer. It was so bad. And I remember I would go in early morning to the teacher. I'd be like, hey, I need some help with this. And he would go through problems with me. He'd do that. I would go after class, after school, and I would go check in and get more help. And it did not matter how much help I got. It did not matter. I still failed the test. And this man was also very much confused because he was like, I know we went through this together. And I said, I know, but I don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like. It's just like this huge frustration. You're putting all this effort in, you're putting all this passion in, you're saying I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, but it's just not working. And I think that's where that gap that medication's coming from. When I first got medication, it was actually halfway through the quarter, around that season. And it was the first time I could follow through everything through the class and actually participate. It was a fast moving class. And because it was so fast moving, I never could actually communicate anything about any of the questions because I was too what's going on? I'm trying to catch up. You're constantly trying to catch up, but then realizing, oh my gosh, this gap, everything just kind of made sense. Yeah. And I think it took me a while to notice these ADHD factors also because I was running a huge portion of the time and the time I would actually do my homework was after practice, and I feel that also helped me kind of make it through a little bit because exercise, running actually is a stimulation, right? So it helps with focus, and that helps with people with ADHD to focus
and so
better.
You would run and then you do your homework.
Yeah, so it would work out for me to make it through, but I got injured, and so once I got injured, I didn't have any of that stimulation either. So I literally was just so lost in both realms. I was lost academically, and then I couldn't do my sport. So it was just it was just so much, you know what I mean?
And okay, I don't know how what this looks like for you, but I feel it's not a not being able to pay attention. It's yes, but it's also, I feel my mind without the medication is going 100 miles per hour, and there's so many different thoughts that I have popping up and stuff like that. And so, maybe the professor in class is and she was wearing a red sock, and I'm oh my God, I remember this really funny time where a red sock was in my wash and it turned all my clothes pink. Pink clothes. Pink is one of my favorite colors. That is such a good color. And then by the time you're oh shit, I'm in class, your professor's on a whole different topic that makes you think of something else, and you're you know what? I should text my dad. I have to do that. And it's almost, I don't know what it is with the ADHD, but it just makes your brain go in all these little directions.
All the connections. No, that's what happens. I literally be we talk about one thing, I'll be yeah, right? That really sounds really good right now. I'll be it's time to lock in. It's kind of what are you doing?
Yeah,
you're yelling at yourself. But the funny thing is that it still happens to me, and I think it still happens to people on a general basis. Normal people do experience that to a certain extent, but not to the extent that people with ADHD do. Because it's literally everything is connection. And that's why object permanence is the hardest thing for people also with ADHD, is because they leave random shit around the house because I was oh my gosh, I gotta take out the dishwasher and pull all the dishes away. And I'm mid doing that, I'm oh my gosh, I have my laundry running. I go to my laundry and then I find something. I was oh my gosh, this is where it was. And I put it on top of the laundry machine. I walk upstairs. I'm oh, I need to grab my basket. And then I'm doing 4 different tasks, half of them half done. And then I'm I need to stop one at a time. That's just how everything just connects. Things just kind of fire off because also the need to do it now is because we know we're gonna forget.
Yes.
We're this is gonna leave our heads if we don't do it now. So immediately.
I don't think that's object permanence though.
Of forgetting things. But I feel object permanence is part of it, right?
Yeah, but I feel what you described was more of the not being able to pay attention. Because you're switching from task to task, and so, or kind of that impulsivity too, to just be okay, I'm doing this, oh, I gotta do this, now I gotta do this. Object permanence, I think, is more where it's you put something, if it's not in your sight, you don't see it, and you don't think about it. So if you put, I saw this TikTok, and it was people with ADHD. They were stop putting your vegetables in the drawers because they always go bad. Instead, put your condiments in the drawers because it's if it's not right in front of you, I always
forget
about things in drawers.
Yes. No, okay. Well, what I'm saying is yes, that makes sense. But the object permanence that comes into it is that, like, I leave my laundry halfway down the stairs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I leave the object that I was grabbing halfway through. Or, like, I left a cup randomly after taking off my dishwasher, like, taking down things from the rack. Like, I leave it somewhere else that I thought, because I'm, like, mid doing a task, but then also forgetting the object in front of me, because I was just, like, moving on to my other thing. So I think it's, like, that combination. That's what I'm saying. But, yeah, object permanence is... Yeah, I always... Something's rotten in my fridge, I'm not gonna lie. If I don't see it...
Yeah, if I don't see it, if she's in the back, she's gone.
Usually... Okay, that happens to so many of my things in, like, my... Like, what do you call, like... The other place where you put all your dry ingredients. I don't know why I'm forgetting that.
A pantry?
Yes.
Okay.
All my little pantry things. I'm like, there's a loaf of bread somewhere stuck in there.
Yeah.
Don't forget, I pull it out. I'm like, oh, let's growing stuff on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're like...
And it's also, I feel like if I constantly... Because if something is in a spot for a really long amount of time, I also forget about it.
Oh, yes.
Like, I had these bagels. You remember those bagels that were sitting on top of my microwave for, like, a month?
Oh.
And, yeah, turn it around, mold. So much mold. And they were there for, like, a solid month because they just kind of blended in after a while. I was like, I didn't even know I had those bagels. Like, that was decor at that moment.
You know, yeah. No, that'd be real. Like, my, like, jewelry. Like, I have a jewelry box.
Yeah.
And I haven't opened that jewelry box in a minute because I forget there's jewelry in it. It's a box. It's nothing. You know what I mean? I'm just, like, walking by, like, ooh.
Yeah.
Like, I don't interact with it. It just exists. And that's why, like, things, like, pile up. Like, my little pile up. Like, if it's just there, it's gonna be there.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I'm like, I feel like I'm very, like, clean, like I'm very noticeably, like to organize and, like, clean my things. So, but, like, even though, like, an item that would be sitting there for, like, a million years.
No, I'm the exact same way. That's why I also was like, well, I feel like I can't have ADHD because I'm so organized. And it's because I'm so unorganized that as a coping mechanism, I have to be highly organized. Like oh my God, when I was younger, I loved a good planner. I still do. I love my planners. And that's because I have so much shit in my mind that if I don't have a planner, it's gone.
Yeah, that happened. Someone was like, oh, can you, like, cover this thing with me? I said, oh, sure, yeah, fine. Totally missed it because I didn't put it in my Google Calendar.
Yep.
And I felt so bad. Like, sir, if it's not in my Google Calendar and I didn't look at it, it does not exist for me. And which is interesting because I don't think I've ever, like, there's only, like, 1 or 2 times I've ever forgotten an assignment. I'm very, like,
exactly, because you're so anal about it.
Because I'm like, I'm going to forget it. I got to be, like, looking into it. So I'm, like, constantly, the only thing that, like, I'd pat myself on the back for, like, the assignment be maybe trash, but will I get it in on time? Absolutely.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. No, but I get that, where it's just, like, you're almost, you expect yourself to not do it, so you, like, hyper prepare because you also want to be successful. And you know that, okay, this is how I have to be successful as a person that's, you know, kind of forgetful.
You know how to work with yourself in a way. Like, you kind of, like, pick up that way. Especially, like...
Which I'm very fortunate to be able to do.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of people can do that. And so they're just struggling still. And it's very unfortunate.
The disorganization.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because it's, like, that's why I was so conflicted in myself. That I was like, oh, no, I don't have this because... I'm organized, I had decent grades, because, like, a lot of certain of the things, there's, like, oh, your grades are going to how Bill, but I was like, I was a really good student, like, in a way that, like, I tried to survive, like, I struggled, yes, but, like, did I make it with decent grades? Yes, I did, you know what I mean? So it's, like, there's very conflicting thing that makes it even harder for women to be diagnosed, too.
Yeah, wait, you just said something, because I had good grades, and that kind of went off for me, because I'm like, wait, why do we associate people with ADHD with having bad grades? I did it earlier, I just realized, and you didn't now, and I'm sure everybody does it.
Yeah, it's a stigmatization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why it's so underdiagnosed, because people don't understand that you can also have ADHD and be successful.
Yeah, they don't think a combination.
Crazy. Same with autism, you know? And sorry, kind of like going back to that, I want to talk about how it's hard because it is destigmatized.
Yes.
And not as, you know, in a sense, it's getting there.
Yeah.
But I still feel like it's hard to tell people, like, oh, yeah, I have autism, because I feel like they're going to see me a certain way. But I wish that they would know, because I'm really tone deaf, especially when I'm saying things. And so there's been times where I say something and it comes off as really mean or really aggressive. And they're like, wow, like, why are you so mean? And I'm like, what do you mean? We were just talking.
We were just chatting.
Yeah, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And yeah, so I feel like if someone knew, oh, she has autism, maybe they'd be a little bit more like, oh, didn't compute. But not to sound dumb, but yeah.
Well, it's just
like a disconnect.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's just something doesn't fire in my brain to be like, I can see this, I can understand this.
No, it totally makes sense. I feel like when I learned about the information, like you having autism, it made me understand certain circumstances of social situations that we might have had. Like, maybe you might have said something, and I'm like, wow, that kind of came off like, maybe like I felt
you
like
want to talk about the car ride?
Yeah. What car ride?
Oh, like 2 weeks ago when I was being like, it was something, we were going to like Trader Joe's and Target, and I guess I was saying something, and Minnie was like, wow, your tone, our other friend, is coming off really harsh. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, it just sounds really harsh right now. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize.
Yeah, because it's like, it makes to understand certain situations. Like, oh, you're not mad at me. Because, like, sometimes, like, you talk to me and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think you're mad. But then I also think about, like, oh, okay, maybe you're not coming off that way. Or, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just certain things that I can understand because I have this information. And knowing that you always have the best intentions when we interact, I can also, like, understand that and have that, like, emotional feedback and understanding. Because, like, I feel like knowing it just makes things easier for both, like, people who are communicating.
Yeah.
Just being like, oh, it's hard for me to read these certain situations, so if I come off a certain way, just ask me. Like, you know what I mean? It helps communication way better. Like, it makes things more clear, not feeling like, oh my gosh, like, you know what I mean? Like, communication is the hardest part.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. And also for me, knowing that my tone sometimes doesn't come off the way I intended, when someone tells me, instead of getting defensive and being like, oh, which I used to do. I used to be like, no, I didn't say that mean.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that I had a different tone. So I was like, what do you mean? I didn't say that mean. Like, what are you talking about? And that would cause even more conflict.
Because you didn't know.
Because I didn't know. I had no idea that my tone sounded like that. And I guess, like, maybe I can't hear myself or something, but yeah. And so now I'm like, oh, if someone tells me, like, hey, girl, you just sounded really mean there, I'm like, oh, shit, my bad. Did not mean it like that. Let me, like, talk with less intensity. That's how I think of it. I always talk, like, a little softer when I'm trying to redo something, because I don't really understand what they mean when they're like, you sound angry. Because I thought I was just talking normally.
No, I think it's because I feel like you associate, like, passion. Like, your thought is like, oh, I'm being really passionate right now.
Yes.
And then I'm reading it as like, oh my gosh, you're really angry at me right now.
Yes.
Because it comes out like, you're just being passionate. You're just like, you're
and
riled up.
That's the ADHD, bro. The combo, it kills me. Because I'm like, oh my God, I have this great thing to tell you. But if I'm talking about something that's negative, like, you know, politics, then the intensity with, like, my ADHD and the tone blindness with the autism is really just, you know, like a double homicide for me.
The combo is just not working.
Yeah,
it's not mixing.
Yeah, no. So it really, like, it's a big struggle, like, my communication. However, because I'm like, I can notice these things, and when people point it out, I really try to, like, evolve and better myself and be a better communicator. So I'd like to think that I'm pretty decent at communication.
No, I feel like you're very clear on your communication because you know the facts that the communication can be off.
Yes.
So you kind of prep the work always throughout when you're communicating. You're always, like, snipping in, oh, are you reading this right? Or are we on the same page?
Yeah.
And, like, these type of things will help kind of make this connect a lot better. And I think, like, communication in that sense is, like, feels a lot like more smoother, just because like
Yeah.
you're both, if you understand yourself and how you communicate, it's so much easier to like present yourself to communicate with others, you know? Just makes things
Well, which
easier.
is hard when if you sound like a bitch, no one's going to tell you, hey, you sound like a bitch. And well, maybe, but if someone told me you sound like a bitch, I'd be like, oh, well, fuck you.
Yeah. You just get aggressive. But then you're like, did I come off that way? You're like,
Yeah.
like trying to wonder.
Exactly.
Okay. What do you wish people knew?
I wish people knew that ADHD isn't just no attention span or like a lack of attention span. Because it is that, but that transforms into so many things. And it's like the snowball effect where, yeah, okay, you know, you struggle to pay attention, but that causes a lot of internal damage that hurts your self-esteem, your motivation, because, you know, if you're not motivated, then you think, oh, it's me. It's a me problem. And so I wish people would kind of take it a little bit more serious and be like, oh, this is a big deal. This doesn't just impact people in education. This impacts how they see themselves.
Yeah, I think that like also not just seeing themselves, but also impacts the way like they function, like we talked about, like throughout life. And then also people see them that way, and then they're like, oh, they're just forgetful, and they're like stupid, and they're just like, you know what I mean? Like they never remember anything. You know, it's just like that kind of like demonization. And I feel like people should just kind of be more of an understanding and kind of sympathize. And also I think people kind of created more resources. I think there needs to be more resources, more conversations about it. I think like when I was